Hi, this is Aaron Azrod, and welcome to the eighth part in our series, Rome, the Decline of Democracy. Where we last left off, Nero was living a life of debauchery. After having just killed his mother, only to be disposed from power by the Senate, which ultimately resulted in him committing suicide. As Rome recovers from the ashes, both figuratively and literally, what new rulers will emerge in Nero's vacancy? Brett, take it away.
Thanks for having me again, Aaron. Yeah, it's a good question. What new rulers will emerge? The answer is in that first year, a lot. So with Nero's suicide, we see the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. And with the end of that dynasty, we see a dramatic loss in official legitimacy. As we discussed in previous episodes, legitimacy is really important for a ruling government, the ruling class, the ruling apparatus. In order, it's the most, I would argue, uninformed, unfortunately, but I would argue that it's the most important thing that a government needs to have is legitimacy to govern, consensus, or not in Latin, like the approval of the people to be governed. And attacks on legitimacy or losses of legitimacy are existential threats to a country, more so than invading armies, more so than revolutions, more so than plague, or even alien invasions. It's the most important thing
I want to kind of connect what you're saying very briefly, to
about
this.
alien invasions.
No, about legitimacy, and I think this relates to Thomas Hobbes in many ways because for him, he had this idea of like the Leviathan or the structure, and what this is about is that legitimacy for I think Hobbes would be we're protecting the man with the strongest muscles, right, or the man with the strongest weapons from just simply ruling, and that legitimacy means like an appeal to the rational or an appeal to the mind or to the logic. So when we start getting away from legitimacy, we're actually getting a lot closer to rule by brute force and by muscles, not by logic or what's in the best interest of a society. And I think that maybe that will help the listeners quite understand what we mean by legitimacy.
That's fair. That's a good point. So you're correct that so humans are a cooperative species where we're wired to work together to form communities and build things that are greater than the sum of its parts. Teamwork is teamwork makes the dream work, Aaron. And we see in our close neighbors, the old and new world primates, they're the same way, right? They have very complex societies, and those societies make every individual in the society better off in some way. And I know it's almost hard to conceptualize, but like even in our society, everyone who lives in our society, everyone is better off than they would be on their own. Well, okay, maybe everyone's not exactly right. I'm sure there are people who are like incarcerated that would have been better off not being incarcerated. But like even the people who are very, very poor generally are doing better than they would be doing if they were just out on their own. Because if they weren't, you always have the option to just go haul ass into the woods and live on your own, right? The
Yeah, a good analogy that I kind of like defer to sometimes is just think about high school and think about who were the kids that were running your high school. I'll admit it right here on the show, like I was a dork, a nerd, or whatever. I was not ruling anything. But typically there's a power structure in like a high school which is not necessarily founded on legitimacy, like someone appealing for the best interest of a student, but just simply muscles, simply brute force, like if you mess with me, I'll kick your ass kind of mentality. And that kind of like, although that looks cool on the outside, like, oh yeah, the strong guy is just like ruling over us, it actually has some very damaging effects on societies in the long run because people's fundamental needs are just not
Absolutely.
being
And
met.
also it's in a fit like I said, we all benefit from cooperation. And when the person at the top is at the top because of muscle, they are need to spend resources to maintain that level of authority and control that would have otherwise been used for more productive things, right? when people work together, you can it's like I don't spend my money on home defense stuff because I trust my neighbors to not rob me, right? And it's like we all, me and my neighbors on both sides, benefit from this cooperation. We can spend our money on other things. But if I thought I was safe, not because I trusted my neighbors, but because I thought I had the biggest guns, then I would have to buy the biggest guns. I would constantly be spending money on firearms. And well, that's food out of my mouth. That's books off my shelf. That's TVs out of my living room. You know what I mean? So, so there's a loss of legitimacy with the death of Nero, and with that loss of legitimacy, we're going to see over this year, with this loss of legitimacy, with the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, is a year of just chaos. It's 68 to 69 AD, and it's like there's like 4 or 5 emperors, and each one lasts for like less than 3 months. You have Nero, who is replaced by Galba, who is like an old soldier, and he's too stingy, and his troops don't like him, and within like months they're like, you know what, I hate this guy. Why are we doing what he says again? I totally forgot. And he's dead, replaced by another guy, Otho. Otho is going to be the new emperor. He's really greedy. He's going to start his machinations, but he's not like, there's not even anything to say about him. He lasts for like 2 months, I think, maybe 3, when he's replaced by a general named Vitellius. Vitellius is going to last for a couple of months, and then Vitellius is going to be replaced finally by the last emperor in this succession of awful people. His name is Vespasian, and he's who I think we should talk about today.
Absolutely. One thing I kind of want to point out here is that these guys that quickly succeed one another, they're all generals, right? And I
Correct.
think going back to like our high school analogy, they kind of have like the bully like mentality where it's like me strong, me powerful, me have army, me take over. And they don't last all that long because in order to really sustain an empire for any duration of time, you have to have a lot of intellect, you have to have a lot of thoughts, you have to have a lot of planning, a lot of wisdom, and a lot of basically mental skills and acumen and finesse to kind of, co-opt the Senate to do what you want to do. Otherwise, it's just sheer chaos. And that's why when we look at history, we don't really see people who really don't have much going on ruling over for long periods of time. And if they are ruling for long periods of time, there's probably a much wiser, smarter little cricket standing on their shoulder, whispering what they should be doing at all times. And I think that's kind of important of like what exactly happens when the strongest person in the room kind of just takes over. They typically don't last in that room that long.
Well, I think I don't know how, frankly, I don't know how smart Vitellius and Otho were in terms of, or how good they would have been at governing. Because the truth, I mean, Vitellius was bad in the few like, basically days that he was emperor. He practically bankrupted the government on banquets and games and that kind of stuff. Was clearly shaping up to be a hedonist emperor, but it's not so much that they were bad emperors. It's that without the legitimacy, without the right to rule, they were just immediately challenged by other people. And it's like, so you commit resources to win a battle, and then so the final emperor in this year is Vespasian, and he wins not because he's the most competent or because he's the most qualified to be the emperor. He wins because he was the most far away. He was in Judea at the time on the orders of Emperor Nero, putting down the first Roman Jewish war. The Jews don't like being governed by the Romans, and we'll see them cropping up in rebellions throughout Roman history.
he has a little luck, this guy, that he just happened. He kind of is out of the fray when it's most intense, and then he can kind of just swoop
Oh,
in
very
and
much, very much. He's lucky. The luck of the Flavians,
it
and
kind of reminds, it's like the U.S. in like World War II. We stay out of it, stay out of it, stay out of it, and then at the end we just kind of come in and like mob the
yeah,
house with
and
them with
no,
everybody.
I mean that's the reasons that we did that and why he did it are different. But yeah, the effect is the same, which is like you come in fresh, take out everyone who's an enemy, and just scoop up all that glory and just be like, we're the best, and like USA, right? And it's that's what he did. He was the farthest away. It took him the longest to get to Rome, and by the time he got there, Otho had already committed suicide. Vitellius was on the throne, but was greatly weakened by his battles with Otho, and Vespasian and his armies were fresh, and they just rolled right in and kicked him out and replaced him. Vespasian, as the last of the emperor in the year of the four emperors, as you would imagine as being the last one, he lasts a little bit longer, right? He does a little bit better. We're lucky. We're lucky. Someone's lucky, I guess, that he ends up not just being the luckiest of the generals, but he's also a very competent and fair ruler too. So the year is Vespasian rules from 69 to 79 AD. He rules for 9 years, and in those 9 years, his main goal is very similar to Augustus, where he wants to kind of like rebuild the Senate a little bit, who's maybe been kind of beaten up a bit from their living under Nero. He wants to kind of like his other thing is he's focused on Judea. He actually, even though he leads the Roman force against the Jews during the Jewish-Roman War, he remembers them as like a fair and worthy enemy, and he has a lot of respect for them, right? So he's
Aw, that's so
yeah
cute.
he's yeah. I mean, well, we'll see that different emperors have different opinions of God's chosen people, and they treat them differently.
Got it.
Same thing with the Christians, right? Some emperors are very kind and judicious to the Christians, and some of them feed them to lions.
Yeah, I mean that you mentioned before that Nero was really on the Christian lion feeding track of things. And then just for those listening, we will be talking about like the rise of Christianity soon because it does parallel also
Oh, it's
with Rome.
Christianity rises out of the fall of Rome like a phoenix. Actually, that's not quite right. It's more like someone was building a house called Christianity inside another house called Rome, and then when Rome collapsed, the only house that was left was Christianity, and so like that's what was like kind of like the skeletal structure of Rome left behind when the empire fell.
Okay, so Vespasian is taken over and he's a pretty
Yeah,
decent guy.
he's expanding Rome's reach in Britain. He's very one of the things that makes him a good emperor, that categorizes him as a good emperor, is that he's very generous with his own personal money and very stingy with Rome's money. So he keeps a very tight budget, but is always willing to spend his own money to help. So like there's stories where senators maybe are down on their luck and they don't have the finances to remain at senatorial rank, and Vespasian personally pays them to stay at that rank so they could stay in the upper class, which is very kind of him.
Well, hold on now. He might be giving them money because it's like, hey, remember I kind of paid your salary for a few years? I sort of need you to vote that way. Because I'm wondering if there's a little bit of like he's using his generosity to kind of get people in his back pocket. Do you think there's a little bit of that going on
Yeah,
as well?
there could be. He in general is very good at propaganda. He
Mm,
immediately sees the need that so one of the reasons that he is the last of the four emperors is because he recognizes the lack of legitimacy and takes steps to fix it beyond just having a bigger army than everyone else. He wages a propaganda campaign where like he prints coins, he builds statues that kind of like link him to like godlyhood and link him to the success of the empire, right? He has like a mantra, which is victory or peace. It's like we will either win or we won't be fighting at all, and you'll be happy. And through this, over the course of a decade or so, he successfully plants in the minds of the Romans that he is best qualified to rule, separate from his military strength.
This is, I like this usage. Like, so he's using like very, this is something interesting because I see this a lot with like today, and I see it a lot during the Russian Revolution. I think with Lenin, like land, peace, and bread, like three freaking words, and every Russian could recite them like there was no tomorrow. And he seems to be going through this kind of appeal, like, hey, I have a right to be here, and he's kind of making this correlation between his name and peace and prosperity.
Oh yeah, I mean, though that's 100% what he's doing, and it's like we were talking about earlier. It's less if you can convince people to stop trying to kill you, you don't have to spend as much resources defending yourself, right? He paid a ton of money to the, or he contributed a ton of money to the arts to have good things written about him and his dynasty. Certain Roman authors, famous Roman authors, or historians rather, like Suetonius and Tacitus, speak well of him, weirdly well, too well, to the point where we as modern historians raise an eyebrow and are like, you have never been this nice to anyone else. Why are you being this nice to him? And it's like there's a little bit of a propaganda thing going on here. A little bit of like, I guess Rome, they didn't have the laws that we have today where you have to say like, this podcast and this historical anecdote includes paid promotion, right? Like
what this reminds me, this actually happens a lot today because I think of the rich philanthropist that donates all this money and they get the Rockefeller Library or whatever it is. Like they usually give like a huge grant to build a new research area. But then that kind of institution is sort of beholden to the interests of that philanthropist, whether they like it or not. Like, if that philanthropist, and again, maybe that philanthropist is not doing anything nefarious or bad, but they could be like, hey man, I really want to see this research come out like this. And it's like, well, this guy controls our purse. He can take away all our funding. We're going to lose half of our staff. Let's just write this article the way that they want it to look like. So I think there's a danger here where you do create friends and you do create allies who will write nicely of you or produce research or produce things that you like, but then that comes at the cost of the absolute truth.
Absolutely. We see parallels with this in lobbying and special interest groups. We've talked about that in the past, but that's a lot of lobbying. When we think of lobbying, often we think of like lobbying as like nefarious. Right. It has a very, very negative connotation in the United States. I don't know about you. When I picture lobbying, I picture the movie Thank You for Smoking.
Yeah.
Remember that movie? Or it's like the evil cigarette companies that know that their product is killing people are paying basically shysters to go to Congress and convince these people that what they're doing is, and actually, I should say for our non-Yiddish speaking people, a shyster is a Yiddish word that it's like someone who is like unethical or knowingly unscrupulous, right? Sorry, I don't want to use another language without.
No, right? So Yiddish is totally fine on this show, my friend.
Especially like New York Yiddish, right? No, it's our city.
As I grab my bagel and lox and enjoy that.
No, as just like a small anecdote, I can't tell you how many people who are, obviously not Jewish and don't speak Yiddish, but know those words because they're like New York slang is like a melding of like English, Italian, a little bit of Russian and Yiddish. But anyway, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Um, so we think of them as like these shysters who are like knowingly going out to like corrupt our seat of power and change it for their ends. But really, a lot of lobbying is is just like, it's like, okay, we have we like I'll just use, like, let's say like oil as an example, right? It's like you work in the oil industry and you think it's important that the government allows oil companies to mine in a certain area. It might not be because you're greedy and you just want all the money. You might legitimately think it is necessary for the safety of the country for us to be energy independent, and you might legitimately believe that the environmental impact will not be that bad, and so you send people who agree with you to speak on your behalf to the seat of power. And so in that light, there's nothing explicitly wrong going on here. And when we talk about Vespasian and we talk about his propaganda campaign, it's probably much of that. It's not him being like, I want you to trick people into thinking I'm a good guy. He's, like you said, he's like, I'm a great guy. I'm going to patron the arts. And the people who I patron are going to be like, yeah, you know what? He is a great guy. I'm going to write some nice things about him.
This is, yeah, so I think that this is more of pragmatism at work here, where it's like, I need these people's support, and like maybe if we look at this art institution, right? And I think this is an important thing to look at. The wealthy philanthropist comes along and gives you a bunch of money. Yeah, 10% or 15% of the stuff you're doing isn't really where your heart and soul lie. Fair enough. But then you still get this extra money to do real art that you're passionate about and so forth. So I think if done correctly and the ends are not terrible, then some good can come of this.
The
And I think that's what he's trying to do here.
Yeah, and then the other side of that too is you have this idea of like, there are people who already like you but are maybe, let's say, in the minority, and you, through your finances, empower them to reach wider audiences.
Yeah.
So you didn't change anyone's mind. You didn't like go out and say like, write nice things about me. You went to someone who already liked you and was like, here's a bunch of money, do whatever you want. And of
Yeah.
course they say good things about you. That's what they wanted to do in the first place, you know? It's like
Definitely
sorry.
an underrated skill. Like every person you burn in this world just becomes like a future enemy. So you can't it's a balance. You can't be so super agreeable that you betray who you are, but at the same time, if you can make someone an ally, just go ahead and do it. If it doesn't betray fundamentally your principles or who you are, it just pays to be decent to people and have them genuinely think highly of you, especially if you are in, trying to consolidate power.
Very wise words. Yeah, I would agree for sure. So Vespasian is running this propaganda campaign that's kind of like solidifying his his position, not just in like complete control militarily, but also he's like what's best for Rome. And he's it's working. I mean, it does work. He does not get replaced by some other usurper. He rules for 10 years and he builds back up the treasury a bit. I should say though that he's not like this like perfect ruler. People who speak out against him are punished. He makes an enemy of the Stoics.
Really?
Or
I
I
love the Stoics. How could you upset the poor Stoics?
Well, so with the Stoics, I shouldn't say he made an enemy of the Stoics. It's more like the Stoics made an enemy of him. They were their teachings of like self-reliance and open-mindedness go against his teachings of like, I make I keep you safe, I bring you victory. And so like many Stoic teachers were tried, and I don't want to say many were executed, but let's just say punished. Okay.
Man, this is like kind of like I sort of see like a modern day like libertarian revolt against like, no, we're fine over here. Like we can totally take care of ourselves. And Vespasian's like, no. we're the state, like we need to kind of come in here and obviously I'm trying to use a modern analogy here. Is there like how is Vespasian ruining their stoic way of life? That's I guess what I'm kind of
He's
scratching.
not ruining their way of life. That's the thing, is that it's just like he's weary of their teachings. And like you said, you literally just said it, of like, don't make enemies when you don't have to. There, even today, we have people who can't help but make enemies when they don't have to, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like like the new order comes in, and they're like, we're going to be doing things this way, and everyone agrees, and then you could just keep your mouth shut and do your own thing and not say anything, but instead you jump on the internet and you're like, this new guy is terrible and I hate him and everyone should be against him, and you're putting a target on your back, right?
Yeah.
Some people just can't help it.
Were the Stoics at this point a sizable number in Rome, or were they just like an outlier community?
Yeah, I mean, Stoic philosophy at this point is a very popular
Okay.
philosophy in Rome.
That makes a little bit more sense, because if they were just like like the Amish or something, or just like a fringe group there on the side, I would ignore them. But maybe he was worried that people would worship their teachers or their kind of like belief system over him, and then there was a bit of a vanity thing going on there.
I don't know exactly how many there were, but I know that it wasn't like a very small fringe. Stoicism was a well-known philosophy at the time, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, we'll see in like a few decades, like, we'll have a Stoic emperor.
Yes, I'm right? Aurelius. I'm waiting for it, man. I love it.
He's
Stoicism is coming back, my friend. It's actually it's starting to rise, man. But we'll get there. We'll get there when we talk about Aurelius. So so Vespasian, he has a war against the Stoics. That's his one flaw. Okay, forgivable. Anything else that he does that's wrong, or pretty much a hunky-dory job for the 10 years?
I mean, there's plenty. There's plenty that he does that's wrong, but that's not what he's known for. He's known for his amicable personality. He's known for his military prowess. Like I said, he's known for donating money to senators and equestrians who maybe are slipping on their finances. He donates a lot of money to cities and towns that are damaged by natural disasters. Vespasian what he's known for now is his gentle personality, his military prowess, like I had said before, his donating of money to senators, equestrians, cities, towns, municipalities, if they had those then, that were like kind of down on their luck. Like I said, he was very generous with his own money. He supported the arts a lot. He was very generous with people who could read and write. He liked history. He was a historian emperor, right?
Why don't we have him on the show? I think he would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I'll see if I can find his phone number. He was good friends with what history often calls the first ever historian and naturalist, a man named Pliny the Elder. Maybe you've heard of, maybe not, maybe rings a bell. And he was a good emperor. And also, that's basically it. And then it's worth briefly mentioning that while he was towards the end of his reign, he was grooming his eldest son, a man named Titus, to be the emperor. And Titus was much beloved by the people of Rome. And when Vespasian died and Titus took over, everyone was really happy. And for the most part, Titus did a good job. He ruled for 2 years, so it's hard to do like a terrible job in 2 years, so to speak.
He went out on top.
Yes. Yes, we're not 100% sure how he died exactly. Maybe poison, maybe like food poisoning. Suetonius says he died of natural causes, but we're not 100% sure. Some people accuse his younger brother Domitian of killing him so that he could seize control. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that Titus took over for a small amount of time and did a good job. Like the only reason I mention Titus now is because he was the emperor during a huge natural disaster in Rome, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the resort town of Pompeii. Titus donated huge amounts of money. He made sure that the consuls for the year, their main focus was quelling the unrest in Pompeii and getting things to normal and supporting the people who got hurt by this natural disaster. Titus was very much an emergency ruler who ruled during a time of natural disaster and did, I mean, if I could editorialize, he did a solid job, right?
Now, this is kind of like, I want to pause for a moment here because this is really important, because I think how a ruler responds to natural disasters or just things that kind of just spur up in the moment says quite a bit about them. And I was having this conversation before with another gentleman, and we talked about this idea that when the disaster happens, you have to be willing to kind of put aside your agenda or what exactly it is that you want to do, or you kind of have to have a very adaptable mindset of like, okay, this has just happened. And I want to talk about, like, do you think, Brett, that like great leaders have a very reactionary kind of muscle to them, or do you think that like that's not as important? Because I definitely think that you should have a solid game plan, but you need to also have a reactionary muscle as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we don't always see it because some rulers do just have the privilege of ruling over general prosperity, and they don't, this metal of theirs never gets tested. But yeah, I mean, it's so important that you have leaders who are able to adapt to situations that were unplanned and uncalled for. And I mean, like, dear Lord, Aaron, I mean, it's 2020 and we're living through the worst natural disaster that we have seen in our lives, that our parents have seen in their lives, and probably our grandparents might be the first ones to be able to say, like, well, we lived through, you know, the Spanish influenza, so we've been there before.
Yeah.
But maybe not. Maybe even grandparents. We're talking generations since we've had a crisis like this.
Now, this is important because
Oh, it's definitely important.
but I think it's also important in how we evaluate leaders, because you know, do you think it's ever acceptable for a leader to be like, oh man, that's a volcano, man, I was taken off guard by that, or you know, anyone else, like, because I think that we do have leaders that sometimes say things like that, like, man, this was out of my control, man, I couldn't have seen it happen. But then there's this idea that I imagine that there must have been in Rome a lot of preventative mechanisms already in place for something like this to occur. There must have been already a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of organization that allows Rome to kind of address a volcano going off, and how to like deal with these situations. So, you know, I'm wondering if a leader has that responsibility. Like, if any leader can just be like, man, you know, I was caught off guard, never saw that one coming. Like, how legitimate is that excuse?
I mean, one, I don't think Rome had any contingency plans for volcanoes. I mean, they knew of volcanoes, but I don't think during the reign of Nero, there were already some sizable earthquakes that were causing damage in Pompeii, but they did not expect a
Hmm.
volcano. There was no playbook, so to speak, for emperors to follow. And in terms of what Titus did, he did go above and beyond to address this issue. He made this the center point of his administration, if you can call it administration, which I think you can. And so really, this is not a question of how good is the leader at dealing with crises, and it's more of a question, in my opinion, of how good is the leader at prioritizing goals and issues, right?
Mm, mm, mm.
Are you capable of understanding that, like, you've been telling yourself these are the priorities your entire buildup, because that's kind of how you even begin the aspirations of being a leader, right? Is you're like, I have some priorities that aren't being addressed, and now I need to be in charge because I need to see that those priorities do get addressed, right?
Because this, I like what you're saying here, and it makes a lot of sense because I think that a lot of rulers are so focused on their image, right? They're so focused on like having the best possible image that when a crisis occurs, they don't really deal with it. They don't feel like dealing it. It kind of falls into a state of neglect because they're like, well, that doesn't pertain to my image directly. But then what I'm banging my head about, Brett, is like the way you deal with that crisis is actually what enhances your image. That's what people will remember you for how well you dealt when that's why we like, FDR. It's like we like the way that he handled World War II. Like we like the fact that he kind of was the man for the job when when the situation came. If he was like, no, I'm too busy being FDR over here, we probably wouldn't really like the guy all that much.
I mean, yeah, that's what happened with Nero. Is there was the Great Rome Fire, and Nero and even Caligula a little bit are obsessed with their personal image, and they do things that they think will make people like them more, but that doesn't include actually helping people. It's just like games and parties. And as we've seen with the United States response to COVID, it's been weak and terrible because, like you just said, right? It's like it doesn't affect your image directly. Not interested, right?
Yeah. So it kind of ties to like I think in psychology, and since you're a you were a psychology major, like narcissistic personality disorder, where it's like I can't I want to go to the Rome fire under Nero for a sec. I want to kind of like actually compare Nero to Titus right now. And I think they're a really good contrast of two different approaches here. Let's just say that the Roman fire could not have been prevented. There was no way that they saw that thing coming. Great. Okay. Fair enough. And the way that Nero reacts to that fire, whether the stories are true that he was just there, playing his, musical instrument, the lyre, on some hilltop and not doing that, is that his mind in that moment is like, how do I make myself look good? How can I continue to continue selling myself? And that kind of obsession blinds him to like literally the ashes and amber that are basically encapsulating all of Rome right before his like very eyes, so to speak. Whereas with Titus, it's like you even said that Pompeii was like a recreational like area, like maybe even away from Rome.
It's a resort town. Yes,
Yeah, it's a resort town.
Pompeii
It's
was
like
a
it's
resort
something
town.
that you're not even like looking at constantly. But the fact that this man is able to see that, oh my God, there's lava there. There's people that are burned, people have lost everything, and so forth. And this is happening somewhere a little bit further removed from where he directly is, shows that one of the things that any good ruler needs is some sense of empathy and the ability to think outside of themselves. And I know that sounds like a very rudimentary and elementary set of skills, but it's something that gets really overlooked.
There's something to be said about gravity here, which is that good rulers do not underestimate problems. Whether because they're smart or they're lucky, they just don't. When we look back at good rulers and we see them handling very rarely do we say I'm struggling now to think of an example of a time where there was some kind of crisis in the past and we remember and we say, oh, that ruler overreacted to that crisis. They offered too much aid and they were too careful rebuilding and it caused problems. We don't say that.
Too many water bottles. Too many water bottles.
Yeah, I mean, I'm serious. Can you think of an example of that?
I've never heard of that either, of overreacting. I mean, if anything, we could just say, vigilance. Like there's extreme levels of vigilance, but I think that vigilance fundamentally comes down to a care of others. Like that's what I think makes someone very vigilant, is that they fundamentally see outside of their immediate existence and their immediate self-worth, and have a consideration or a care or the ability. If Nero would have just sat for a second in his chair and been like, God, how would I feel if I lost my whole house in a fire? Man, I'd feel pretty bad. Man, I ought to do something to help people. I
Well,
think,
to Nero's credit, he did offer some assistance and some, you know, relief to the people who suffered from it, but he also greatly benefited from the fire itself, which again, to compare to modern politics, you know, especially in the United States, there's many people who maybe did provide some relief to the U.S. for COVID, but also themselves greatly benefited, which raises questions in the common people of like, did you do everything you could have done to fix this? Did you
mm,
just pay lip service? Like, is that all we were worth to you? Was like the bare minimum? Because like I just said, I literally can't think of a time in history where we remember rulers as like they took too many precautions. But I can think of a ton of rulers where we think of them and we say they did not do enough.
yes, and it's also just I like what you mentioned about Nero there is that when he is helping, there's also like another angle of, oh, well, this quietly also takes care of my business interests and so forth in some other
Yeah.
direction. And I'm like, well, that's not really, true leadership, because I think true leadership comes with some degree of sacrifice. And in order to help the people in Pompeii, you might have to sacrifice funding for something that you want. I'm just being hypothetical here, but let's say they had money to build the Titus Library or the Titus Monument. Okay, let's just pretend that
Mhm.
that was a case. It obviously wasn't. I think a good ruler like Titus, if he had any brains, would be like, okay, we don't need to like build this monument glorifying me. Let's go ahead and take that money. Let's reallocate the money for the Titus monument and deal with the Pompeii situation. Whereas a Nero would be like, whoa, 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 whoa. We need to get the money from somewhere else. That Nero statue is going right up there.
Yeah, yeah, it's I mean, you said it at the beginning of this, which is that flexibility is so important. That
Yeah,
that
yeah.
ability to change and be like, my priorities have shifted, our priorities have shifted, we're doing something new now, is so important in a good leader to be able to recognize where the priorities need to be at any given moment and then apply resources to those priorities is how we remember good leaders and bad leaders, more
Yes.
so more so than we remember them as like this guy was mean or this guy was nice. I mean, history does not remember Winston Churchill as an oafish alcoholic bore of a man who was mean and pushy and aggressive, but
Yeah.
he is that. He is all those things. If you read his biographies, you will see that he is not a pleasant person. History remembers him as the man who prioritized England's and Europe's defense against Germany in World War II and allocated proper resources to ensure the survival of the state of England during the 1940s, right?
Yes. Yes.
History does not remember Abraham Lincoln as this like boring and slow-witted man who was a little bit ugly, frankly, right? He's not the nicest looking guy. They remember him as the man who prioritized um, union reformation above everything else and put in the necessary resources to ensure that the Civil War went in the direction of the North and not the Confederate States, right?
Yes. I think this, to tie it all together, I think that this reminds me of something you said in one of our first few episodes together, that it's the man who doesn't build the statue of himself that gets remembered. Like, it was a lot of rich, wealthy Roman folk that were like, yeah, I'm going to commission a marble statue of myself. It's the guy who actually did some really incredible, awesome stuff. And then people decided to build a statue to honor that person, that they actually are the ones that get remembered. Brett, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This concludes the eighth part in our series, Rome, the Decline of Democracy. I'm Aaron Azrod.